Guinness, are you taking care of that camera?
Scrubbing. Yeah, scrubbing. After we took our engine apart, I spent most of my time scrubbing the gunk off. Carrot gave the frame a good detailing and we put some new black trim on. Made the whole thing look a little bit more slick. Finally, a box of parts arrived. For a full unboxing video, check out Steve's channel, where he goes into more detail.
Bon, ça change un peu des livres-cas masqués qu'on connaît chez nous. Voilà. On a un livre-cas en course longue. Il faut gratter encore un petit peu en cylindrée.
We got a 60mm stroke crankshaft that was cut for a reed valve. Our 30mm carb. Some bearings. The big reed valve intake. And the cylinder, which is the 177 Polini cast iron. We ditched the Polini cylinder head for a better gig speed head. I want to keep it simple but tickle as much out of it as I can. The last thing that arrived was a pipe design exhaust. It arrived straight from Germany. It has this really nice carbon fiber silencer. And it just feels very, very slick. Some good craftsmanship. Shout out here to Marco from Pipe Design, who was very helpful in choosing the entire setup. The Polini and the LML cases were very far off from each other. First off, I needed to reinforce with JB weld, let it set, and then start to widely open up the cases. I gave it some very large and wide port intakes, aligned the cylinder pretty well, but I ended up having to open the cylinder and especially open up the forward side ports, so the whole thing fits together perfectly. After a quick last clean, it was time to mount the bearings. I improvised this little tool to help me press on the needle bearing guide onto the crankshaft without much force. In the same manner, I mounted the crankshaft with, again, a improvised tool that I made to help me pull the crankshaft through the clutch side and have it align perfectly. I mounted the primary, I pulled the axle through, and I got ready to mount the gearbox, which is one of my favorite things to do. So I mounted in the same direction that I took them out, mounted the cruciform. Then it's deselect the rod, and in order to block the whole thing, I just put a screwdriver through. And for those who are freaking out, don't worry, I did not scratch the gasket surface. You can see here I'm pointing at the little marks so that the gears are in the right direction, and then it's just a washer and a circlips, and done. Seems scary, but if you do it second, third time, it's just easy. I greased up my gasket and got ready to close up the engine, and I think you can figure out at this point that there's something wrong here. Yes, I got the wrong gasket. This is a P-series gasket and not an LML gasket, and I knew this is not gonna work, but I wanted to close up the engine and start measuring and work on my timings, so I just closed it up in this way. A couple days later I got a new gasket, pulled it apart and changed it. I need a small break, so I tried to Wheelie Mark scooter. Mark, I'm sorry. Now to my favorite part. After I made sure that at bottom dead center the piston clears the ports, I measured my squish. I did this a couple of times with different gaskets, and I ended up at 1.35 with the gig speed head and a 2mm gasket underneath, which was kind of my happy place. I then measured the port times, which I did every single time I had a gasket in, and I ended up at 176.5 to 125.5, which was a good base to work with. The cylinder studs kind of pissed me off, so I recut the threads, which makes the whole thing easier to take on and take off all the time. I was curious how much volume the head had, so I could calculate my compression ratio. So I put the piston at top dead center, got some thick gear oil, and filled it up. And while I was filling it up, I made sure I wrote everything down, and I got my volume down so I could calculate the compression ratio, which ended up to be 9.7 to 1, which is pretty good, especially with crappy US gas. I needed to raise the exhaust port to, I wanted to get to 185.5, so I made a little blueprint. I calculated everything with this little calculating thing online, and I got to jumbling. I did this over and over and over again until I was happy, and I was at exactly 185.5 to 125.5. Before reassembly, I gave everything a good clean. I got some Grand Sport piston rings, and I made sure that no crap got into the engine. Here you can see the gig speed head. And of course, after I cleaned everything, I realized that I forgot to do piston ring clearance, which you can see me do here. While I mark little nudges on the piston for reassembly, you can get a good glimpse at the exhaust port. I'm pretty happy with it. I widened it to the sides and up, and I think it's nice and clean inside. So I mounted my piston rings, cleaned everything up, and got ready for final assembly. Now before wheeling John's bike. Hi John. Next up is final assembly of my cylinder. I can just loop up my my pin bearing, mount my piston, mount the piston pin, and then put the clips in. I've gotten quite good with the clips over the past couple of years. I just kind of lever them in, you can hear them click, and then I twist them around to make sure they seated well. To make sure everything is really sealed up, I put a very thin layer of silicone gasket on the outside of the whole thing, so we make sure nothing gets out and everything's nice and sealed up. I then just, slip on the piston into the cylinder, make sure there's nothing that's bothering, and then I go ahead and mount my cylinder head, torque it down, and mount my spark plug. My favorite kind of part of this whole build was the ignition. With this Molossi ignition, you just mount your coil on your stator plate, torque it down, feed your cables through, and then put the flywheel on. You just gotta make sure that your stator plate is aligned with the little indication on your crankcases, and that's it. It is really, really dumb and easy. I just want to make sure it's torqued down with my flywheel holder. Of course, I lighted off the timing when the bike was on. I then get to mount the clutch. I'm missing a little bit of footage here, but this is the original clutch. We're currently waiting on a stronger one, which is going to be in the next video, and it will also have a longer transmission. I then mounted the backplate of the wheel hub without snapping these tiny crappy bolts, and I mounted new brake pads to make sure that we got some stopping power in the back. What you don't see is me trying to fiddle this whole thing on. A little bit of help of the mallet. Everything went well and smooth, and we got ready for final mounting the engine into the frame. It got really exciting. I need a pair of extra hands, so Karen and I, we hung the engine in, make sure that everything was properly torqued down, and mounted this beauty of an exhaust. it wasn't really much trouble, and I just did some quick wiring to make sure that I got some sparks so we can see if the bike fires up on the while it's on the lift. In order to get some fuel in there, I mounted a little funnel with a tube that goes to the carburetor, and at a later point I cleaned the whole thing up. I ran my cables properly, as you can see in this picture. With some fuel in the funnel, we were ready to fire this thing up and see if weeks of work paid off. You saw it fired up on the second kick, and I was super eager to take it out, so I mounted the wheels and got it ready to run. All that's left now is wiring up the lights, mounting the remaining body panels, jetting it probably, and getting it on a dyno to see what it got. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the most exciting keystrokes I've ridden so far. The front wheel just doesn't want to stay down. On that note, I'll leave you and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.